Hey there, welcome back to another video. This one will talk about percent proportion. And what does that mean? Well, we know what percents are, right? We know when we say 100% of something that we're taking the entire thing. And a proportion is a ratio, right, between two things. And in particular, when we talk about percent proportion, we're looking at the proportion of something that we're taking out of the whole. So if we look at this pizza, if we say we have 100% of the pizza, it means we have the whole pizza, right? Now, what does it mean when we say we have 50% of the pizza? Well, then we have half of the pizza, right? Well, we want to formalize this a little bit so it's easy for us to understand when we say, oh, we have 67% of the pizza, what does that mean? Well, let's start by simplifying and sort of defining again what a percentage is. Imagine that we could divide this pizza here to 100 pieces. Obviously, I can't get 100 slices out of this little drawing here, but imagine that we could divide it into 100 thin slices. Well, what does it mean that we have 100% of this pizza? Well, in terms of slices, it would mean that we have 100 slices, right? So that's 100%. What if we have 50% of this pizza? Well, that would mean that we have 50 slices of the pizza, right? And if I say we have, 32% of the pizza, well, in this case, we have 32 slices, right? Because percents are just 1 out of 100 of the whole thing. So if we say we have 32 slices, that is 32%. If I say we have 32%, we have 32 slices. And that is because we went ahead and we cut the pizza into 100 slices. So when we have 100 slices, the way to translate slices to ratio or part of the whole is quite simple, right? Because it just translates exactly to the number of pieces. So what I'm saying is if we have X percent of the pizza, that would mean that we have X slices in this case, right? Because we have 100 slices. In other words, if we have X percent, that means we have X slices, X slices out of 100 slices, right? That would mean X percent. Okay, how does that translate to a slightly more generic equation for this? Well, if we have number of slices that we took out of 100 slices, right, that would equal the percentage divided by 100. So if the percentage is 30, we have 30 over 100 equals the number of slices, which again, because each slice is just 100th of the pizza, is 30 out of 100. So can this be generalized to any pizza? For instance, what if we, I'll erase these slices here, and let's now slice it into 4 slices, okay? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 slices. Okay, what happens if I have 1 slice out of the 4? So I have my number of slices here out of the total number of slices is just 1 out of 4. Okay, how much is that in percentage? Well, it's a quarter, right? What is a quarter of 100? If we do 100 divide by 4, we get 25. So that would equal 25%. 25% is just 25 divided by 100, right? If we compare that to our case with 100 slices, what that really means is that in every quarter here, we have 25, we could make 25 little slices, which each is a percentage. So let's clean this up a little and look at this in a more formal way. So looking at this pizza now again, let's say that we can slice it up into an arbitrary number of slices, whichever number we want. So the total number of slices is, we'll call that just the total of our slices, okay? So this equals the total number of slices. Okay, now of that total, we're going to take a certain number, okay? We're going to take part of the whole of the total number of slices. So this will be the number of slices that we take or eat or whatever or serve. Okay, now that ratio, we can have a ratio of the part to the total, right? This is just the number of slices we took out of the total number of slices. So if we sliced it into 8 and we served 2 slices, the total would be 8 and the part would be 2. That part divided by the total, the ratio or that proportion, is just equal to the percentage that we took divided by 100. Because, again, here the total number is 100, right? Our total number of slices on this side is 100, and the percentage is just the number of slices if we would combine all our very thin slivers of pizza into the number of slices that we have here. And those ratios are equal. So if we decide that we're taking half of a pizza, if we initially cut it up into 100 slices, that would mean that we're taking 50 out of 100. If, on the other hand, we sliced it into 8, like a normal pizza store, right? It divides by 8, but we took only half of it, that part would be 4 slices, right? 4 is just a half of 8. So 4 out of 8 equals 50 out of 100, right? Which is just the percentage out of 100. And this is true for any complicated case. So let's formalize this for anything, not just for a pizza, and for any number of parts of a whole. And let's say that if we have part divided by the whole, so we separated out of the whole a certain part, the ratio of part to whole is equal to the percentage we took. So if we can express it in percentages, divided by 100. Now in some questions you'll have words that use part and whole. In some questions you might have the words is, of, and we'll show examples of both. But again, a certain part of, or this is a percentage of, depending on the wording of the problem, what you'll see is that you always have this ratio. Part divided by whole is equal to percentage out of 100, or we can use the words is divided by of, percentage is equal to percentage divided by 100. And in the next slides, we'll look at a whole bunch of examples so that we really understand this formula. So let's use these two formulas in the next few examples. Well, let's copy them over. So just so we have these as a reminder, part out of whole, right? The ratio of part to whole is equal to the percentage as a number divided by 100, or if the wording is different, is of is also equal to percentage out of 100. And let's start with examples such as 12 is what percentage of 30, Okay, so we have the words is and of, right? And we're looking at how much is 12 in proportion to 30. So we're looking at this formula here is of 12, the ratio of 12 to 30, right? That's the ratio of is to of is equal to whatever percentage we have divided by 100, where again x is the percentage in a number. Okay, so how do we solve this? Well, remember when we look at when we're comparing two fractions, what we like to do is to have a common denominator. In order to have a common denominator, we can either use the cross multiplication as a shortcut, or we can just go slowly and really get a common denominator by multiplying and dividing both fractions by the denominator of the other one. How do we do this? Well, starting with this fraction here on the left, let's multiply both the top and the bottom by 100, right? We're allowed to do this. So we get on the left-hand side here, we have 12 times 100, divide by 30 times 100, which is 3,000. And on the right here, we are going to multiply and divide by 30. Let's use a dot to multiply here. So we have on the bottom here, we have x times 30 divide by 3,000. So we have exactly the same denominator on both sides. And we're saying that 12 times 100, which is just 1,200, right? We just add another 2 zeros, is equal to 30x, where we've gotten rid of the denominator because they're equal. So we have now 1200 equals 30x, and we can divide both sides of this equation by 30. So on the left-hand side, we have 1200 divided by 30, which is just 40. And on the right-hand side, we have 30x divided by 30, which is just x. And so our answer is x equals 40, which means that x equals 40%, right? And 12 is 40% of 30. Okay, we're going to do a few more examples to make this clearer. So don't worry if this one was a little bit too quick. Let's do another very similar example. Take this one. 22 is what percent of 40? Okay, again, remember we have is and of, and I'll remind you here the ratio is to of, right, is equal to the percentage in number divided by 100. So let's answer this. 22, the ratio of 22 to 100, right, is equal to the percentage in number, which we will try to find out, divided by 100. Whoops, and I made a mistake here. It's not 100, but should be 40, right? So 22, the ratio of 22 to 40, which is the ratio of is to of, is equal to the percentage, which is x, and we will figure out, divided by 100. Let's cross multiply, right? We do that. So we have 22 times 100 is equal to x times 40. Okay, the next step is to divide by 40. Let's divide both sides by 40 because we would like to isolate and solve for x. So we'll divide by 40 here and here. So on the left-hand side, we have 22 times 100, which is just 2,200, right? We add 2 zeros, divide by 40. This is equal to x times 40, divide by 40. These are canceled, so we just have x. So what is 2,200 divided by 40? Well, our first step, we can simplify this fraction by dividing both the numerator and the denominator by 10, right? And then we'll have 220 divided by 4. So what is 220 divided by 4? Well, 22 divided by 4 is just 5. 5 times 4 is 20, right? We have 2 left over here, 2 remainder. We bring down our 0. We have 20 divided by 5, that's just by 4, that's just 5 again. So our x equals 55, which basically means that 22 is 55% of 40. Okay, and that is the answer. So now let's word our problems a little bit differently, and let's see how we work with slightly different problems. For instance, we can ask, what is 25% of 72? Okay, so again, we have the is and the of, right? Remember, the ratio of is to of equals the percentage in number divided by 100. Okay, so what do we have here? We are asking what is. So that means what we're missing is the is. Our is here is our variable x, okay? So we have in our formula now, we have x instead of the is. The of is 72, right? We have 72, and we know that that equals the percentage in number, which is just 25, divided by 100. So now we are solving not for the percentage, but actually for the part of the whole that we have taken, or the is in this case. How do we do this? Well, it's the usual. We have two fractions, and we're comparing them, right? We're saying that they're equal, and so we can cross multiply the two. So we have 100 times x, right, on the left, equals 72 times 25. How much is 72 times 25? Let's do this over here. Okay, 5 times 2 is just 10. Put down a 0 and carry a 1. 5 times 7 is 35. So we have 36, including the 1. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 7 is 14. And so when we add this up, we get 1,800. So we have 100x, 100 times x, equals 1,800. Okay, now we would like to solve for x, so we have to isolate it. We will do that by dividing both sides by 100. So we have 100x divided by 100, that's just x, right? The two 100s cancel, equals 1,800 divided by 100. Well, when we divide by 100, we just take away 2 zeros, so we have 18. So our result is x equals 18, but in a full sentence, we can say that now that 18, which is our is just 25% of 72. Okay, and this is a full answer to the question. Now let's look at a problem that is formulated, again, just a little bit differently. So let's answer the question, 90% of what number is 54? So again, we have is and of, but the order now is different. As a reminder, the ratio of is to of will be equal to the percentage in a number divided by 100. So what do we have here? We have our is 54. of what number? So the of is our unknown in this at this time, right? So 54 divided by x, the ratio of 54, the is to the of, equals 90% in a number divided by 100. So in this case, we're not looking for the percentage or the part. We're actually looking for the whole part, right? We had part of whole is equal to percentage divided by 100. So in this case, it's the whole that we're missing. How do we solve this? Again, we will cross multiply. So we have 54 times 100, right? Multiply here, then we cross multiply the other side, equals 90 times x. Okay, what's our next step? We like to divide both sides by 90 so that we can isolate our variable x. So on the left-hand side, we have 54 times 100, which is just 5,400, divide by 90. And on the right-hand side, we have 90 divided by 90, which is cancels out, equals x. Now we can simplify the ratio here on the left, right, by dividing both denominator and the numerator by 10. So we have 540 divided by 9. What is 540? Whoops. Let's just write that further up here. 540 divided by 9. Well, 54, 5 divided by 9, 9 doesn't go into 5, but it does go into 54, and it actually goes into 54 exactly 6 times. 6 times 9 is exactly 54. We bring down the 0, and we have 60. So x is equal to 60, and our answer in a full sentence is 90% of 60 is 54. Again, is and of. There we go. That is the complete answer. So as you can see, the wording in some of these problems is a little different, and the important thing is to figure out from the wording in the problem which words or which numbers and variables correspond to the words in our formulas here. So let's look at another one, another problem that has a slightly different wording. Here we have find 16% of 70. So we have of here, so we know we're looking at the wording of is, the ratio of is to of equals percentage in number divided by 100. So we have of is 70. We have the percentage here that would go in this side of the formula. What we're missing is. So is this time is our variable. So we have x, our variable. The ratio of x to 70 is just equal to the percentage in number, which is 16, divided by 100. So in this case, again, our variable here is. We have to find what the ratio, what the part of 70 is that just gives a percentage, 16%. So how do we solve for x? Again, we cross multiply. Let's do that. We have 100 times x equals 70 times 16. How much is 70 times 16? Let's do that. Okay, zeros here, right? 0 times 16 is just 0. 7 times 6 is 42. So we carry over the 4. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 4 is 11. So we have 1,120. So 100 times x equals 1,120. Now to isolate x, we will divide by 100, right? Both sides of the equation. On the left here, the two hundreds cancel, so we have x equals, and we have 1,120 divide by 100. Okay, well, when we divide by 10, we'll just lose 1 0. But since we have to divide by another 10, we have to divide by 100, we'll actually get 11.2. So 11.2 is our x, right? And if we want to write it in a full sentence, we find that 11.2 is 16% of 70. And that is the full answer. So this is the end of this video. There were quite a few examples, and in our next video about this subject, we'll actually look at some word problems, and hopefully that'll really bring everything together in terms of the percent proportions. So thanks again for joining me here, and I will include a link to the word problems in the comments below. Okay, thanks, and see you in the next video.